Welcome to Oyate Today. Oyate in Lakota means people. Oyate Today is sponsored by Security First Bank, your financial partner since 1898. Security First Bank, a relationship you can count on. Member FDIC. Hi, welcome to Oyate Today. I am your host, Richie Richards. Oyate Today is produced by Tim and Jackie Giago. Tim is an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. Our guest tonight happens to be Mr. Tim Giago, owner of Native Sun News Today here in Rapid City. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
It's my pleasure, Richie.
It's going to be a great discussion. I'm excited to hear and learn a little bit more about you, so thank you for being here.
Well, you know what? I thank you for taking on the responsibility of hosting the show for us every week. You've done a terrific job, and you seem to have grown into the position as the host.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a great honor to be here. Tim, could you tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, where you were raised at, please?
Well, I was born in the old hospital in Pine Ridge Village, and lived at Wounded Knee when I was a boy. And my dad used to work at the Wounded Knee trading post. And we moved to Kyle. And so I spent most of my first 10 years on this earth in Kyle. Just enjoying the good life and fishing in Kyle Dam.
Yeah, I bet.
That was a wonderful childhood. Moved up to Rapid during the war, 1940s, and settled into Rapid and learned a whole new way of life. Even worked a little bit. Got a job setting pins in the bowling alley, me and Hobart Lone Hill.
So that was done physically then before it was automated?
They had no automation. You set all the pins by hand.
Wow.
And my hands were small, so I had a hard time trying to pick up 4 bowling pins at the same time.
Yeah.
So I finally, Hobart said, I don't think you can handle this job. So I washed out of my first job in Rapid.
That was the end of your bowling career. In the 1970s, you began your journalism career, and you began that in California. And I was really intrigued when you told me the story earlier, but could you talk to us a little bit about that experience for you? You
know, Richie, actually, I just became into this business by accident. I was stationed in San Francisco at San Francisco Naval Shipyard, and I was working in the pay department. One day I was sitting at my typewriter typing away on a requisition, and my commanding officer came in. He stood behind me for a little while and didn't say anything. He left. A little while later he came back. He said, you know, he said, our editor for the base newspaper just got transferred to San Diego, and you're the new editor.
Wow.
Because you can type.
Because you're typing?
So that was how I got my career in journalism, so to speak. So I put out the base paper all the time I was stationed there and had a lot of fun with it. We tried to make it humorous and got the experience of being on a schedule, keeping deadlines and that kind of thing. So, but living in San Francisco, I heard of a gentleman named Rupert Costo. And Rupert was a Kawia Indian from Southern California. And at one time, his tribe numbered in the thousands, but during the gold rush of 1849, they were almost totally wiped out. At one time, there was probably only about 30 people out of 2,000 or 3,000 of his tribe still alive. So he was very interested in journalism. He went to the University of Nevada, which is the school I went to, coincidentally. And he was reading a newspaper by a guy named Carlos Montezuma. And Carlos was an Apache Indian, Fort McDowell. And he was very strong-willed and had powerful editorials in which he challenged the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the United States government, for the treatment the Apache people were receiving. And Carlos's Indian name was Wasaha, which meant smoke signals. And so Rupert emulated him. He started a newspaper in San Francisco, a monthly paper, which he named Wasaha after his idol. And it started in the 1970s. I went to work for him in the 1970s, and advertising, sales, did some writing, but did whatever Rupert wanted me to do. And got my feet wet, really, learning a little bit about what was happening in Indian country, because it was a national paper. It came out once a month. Extremely popular in its day. Everybody couldn't wait to get their, a lot of people would pronounce Wasaja. The J is silent, of course. And so Rupert kept the paper going until he started getting ill in the 1980s. And when he died, his wife ran it for a little while, Jeanette Costo. And between the two of them, they not only published a newspaper, they wrote several books. They ran the Indian Historical Society. They wrote some of the really, really good books on the genocide of the Native Americans in California during the gold rush days. So they're classic, and I think everybody should be able to read those.
Yeah, I studied out in California, and I visited many of those old missions along the coast there. I think there was 21 total, but really bad experience out there for them. What was some of your highlights of working for them then? What were some of the great stories that came out of that time?
Well, I think probably when the state of California or the Catholic Church decided they were going to canonize Juniper Cerro, the priest that founded all the missions, starting in San Diego all the way up to San Francisco. And he had some really, really cruel happenings at the Indian missions, and they were building them. They took the local Indians and put them in cages practically, separated the men from the women, took the children away from the parents and put them into schools where they changed their names and wouldn't let them speak their languages, much like what happened in the rest of the United States, but this was 100 years before it hit South Dakota. And so when they were talk of making him a saint, Rupert and Jeanette protested mightily, and I was right along with them, simply because I worked for them, and I believed strongly what they believed in. So I think that was one of the highlights of working for them.
I think you guys did some great work. He was pretty brutal on them back then. So let's see, in 1980 now, you worked for the Rapid City Journal. What was that experience like here in Rapid City?
Well, it was different. Having worked for Wasaha. In fact, I got a job at the Journal because of Wasaha. One of the editors, a guy named Jim Carrier, read Wasaha and saw some of the writing I did in there, and he called me and wanted to have coffee. So we met over at Tally's restaurant and had coffee, and he said, "How would you like to write for the Journal?" So I started writing a weekly column and then eventually became a staff writer. And it was different in that in order to cover Indian country, there's a lot of mileage between Rapid City and the different reservations. And I think the cost factor was probably one of the deciding things, but it was hard for them to send reporters out to the reservations to do some of the stories that I would have liked to have been reading. And I finally got permission to start going out. First, they let me cover Pennington County Commissioners, which was probably exciting as watching paint dry. And so I finally got to go out to the reservation and do some interviews. I interviewed people like Russell Means and some of the things that were happening back in the early 80s. So that was my first introduction into really covering Indian country as a reporter. I did a lot of it with Wasaha, but mostly by telephone since we were in San Francisco. But actually to get to travel out to the reservation and do stories was really a good part of learning to be a good journalist.
How receptive was the community then for those type of stories, as far as stories from the reservation or Indian country then?
Well, what it did for me is a lot of the people who read some of the stories I wrote in the journal, that some of the people I grew up with at Pine Ridge, like Dickie Brewer, Melvin Brewer, he came up and we visited and had coffee, and he said, "Why, we need a paper down in Pine Ridge." He said, "Why don't you come down and build a paper down there?" And I said, "I'm a newspaper reporter. I don't know anything about running a newspaper." He insisted. So I went to Jim Keene, who was the editor of the Rapid City Journal at the time, and told him, I'm going back to Pine Ridge and I'm going to start my own paper.
Wow.
And Jim Keene said, well, whatever I can do to help.
He was supportive of it.
He was supportive of it all the way.
You know, Tim, let's take a break, but when we come back, let's learn about Lakota Times then, and that began in 1981.
Right.
So let's talk about that. Let's take a break. When we get back, we'll learn a little bit more about Lakota Times and the career of Tim Giago. We'll be back after a word from our sponsors.
You can't predict life's ups and downs. You just give it all you've got to stay on top. But it's easier with a partner like Security First Bank. Since 1898, we've been riding with you through the country's biggest ups and downs. And this is where we'll stay. Security First Bank, a relationship you can count on. Member FDIC.
Our school has great students and dedicated teachers, but we need our community volunteers to help us to provide a broader view of the many ways a good education can point to a bright future.
Did someone say volunteer? Our team at Black Hills is here to help. In fact, we sponsor events and projects, and our employees volunteer for organizations throughout the Black Hills, including partnering with schools to help students learn more about life outside the classroom. Extracurricular, extra fun.
Native Sun News has been voted the best weekly newspaper in its class for 2015 by the South Dakota and North Dakota Newspaper Associations. You can find a copy of the Native Sun News at many businesses and vending machines in Rapid City and the surrounding area, and on all 9 reservations. We publish every Wednesday, so advertisers and subscribers can reach our diverse readership by calling 605-721-1266. The Native Sun News covers the other side of the story.
Hi, welcome back to Oyate Today. Once again, our guest tonight is Tim Giago, owner of Native Sun News Today and former owner of Lakota Times, Lakota Journal, and Indian Country Today. Thank you so much for being here once again, sir.
My
I appreciate
pleasure,
it.
Ricky.
Now, in 1981, you started Lakota Times in Pine Ridge. You said that you had the support of the editor of the Rapid City Journal at that time.
Right.
And can you talk to me about that experience, please?
Well, you know, the first thing when you're going to start a business, you have to have the money to do it. And I own land, I hold land in the Pine Ridge Reservation, but you put your land up for collateral. Most banks won't because it's trust land. So I needed money to start a newspaper. I went over to Rushville, Nebraska. There's a bank then called Stockman's Bank. And the loan officer was a guy named Greg Hunter. And sat down and talked to Greg, told him what my plans were, how I thought I could build a good, successful business on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And Greg sat and listened and approved a loan for me.
Wow.
So I started that newspaper with $4,000 and opened a little office in an abandoned beauty shop in Pine Ridge Village. My first typesetter was a lady named Mary Irving. And I think her daughter Jennifer works for Thunder Valley right now. So she used to put her in a little box next to her chair as a baby while she was typesetting the newspaper. And we published, our first paper came out in July of 1981. And I delivered it, took it to the printer, got it printed, piled it in the back seat of my car, drove it all over the Pine Ridge Reservation that same day, delivering it. I came back into Pine Ridge Village and tired. It was getting dark, and I see 2 old elderly gentlemen, Lakota gentlemen, sitting on a bench across from Sioux Nation Shopping Center. They're both got a copy of the Lakota Times.
Wow.
They're reading that. Said, oh my God, my first newspaper, it's gonna make it. So that was the highlight of my day. And the paper just started to grow and continued to grow. We expanded to Rosebud. Lower Brule, Crow Creek, Cheyenne River. Pretty soon we were on all the reservations in the state of South Dakota.
Wow.
And we just couldn't keep up with the growth. We were growing so fast. And I think it's because the Native American people, we just did not have our own media back then. There was a small paper in Pine Ridge they called Crazy Horse News, published by a gentleman named Aaron DeSursa, and it only came out periodically, and it was kind of slanted to one side as far as the news went. And we wanted to have a paper that covered everything. We wanted to cover education, we wanted to cover tribal government, we wanted to cover health, we wanted to cover the issues of achievers on the reservation. People are doing good things, because our experience in the past had been reading all the bad things that Native Americans were doing. We didn't have a whole lot of positive stories, and I knew, having grown up on the reservation, there's a lot of good stories out there, a lot of good people out there. So that was the way we started the paper. We wanted to put out the good news and to stay away from the bad. Of course, like a newspaper, we had to cover the bad every now and then, because that's part of what news is all about.
Sure.
And
I bet the sports world sure liked what you were doing too then, as far as being able to talk about athletes and student athletes and
yes.
great games in schools. And
Well, as a matter of fact, the Lakota Nation Invitation was just going into the third, fourth, fifth year when we first started our paper. And that became one of our main focuses. Every December, we were out in full force covering the Lakota Nation Invitation. It was called the All Indian Tournament back in those days, and hadn't moved up to Rapid yet. And when it moved up to Rapid, it brought a big fan base who didn't just come up here because they loved basketball, they loved to watch their teams. It was around Christmas time. People came up here with stayed in the hotels, motels, went to the restaurants, and then they did their Christmas shopping at the same time. So the LNI to Rapid City was a tremendous economic boost. And I think it took South Dakota, it took Rapid Cityans a long time to understand that here's the part of the year when there's no tourists and it's our slack time of year. All of a sudden, we have all these people coming into town and spending their money and taking advantage of all the good things that are happening in Rapid City. And it took my salespeople with the newspaper a long time to convince a lot of these merchants that this is good for your business. I mean, you need to reach out to the people that are coming up here and advertise the products you're going to sell. Give them some sale prices. Give them some bargains. And it's finally starting to do that now, but my God, it's been over 30 years.
Yeah, I think they're in their 41st year this year, and they're still coming around.
It took a long time for it to sink into the citizenship here in Rapid City and to the merchants. And I think it's finally reached that point. And I think I can credit the Lakota Times, the old Lakota Times, with being a good part of the growth of the Lakota Nation Invitation. We were there first covering it. The Rapid City Journal or other papers didn't come down to Pine Ridge when it was being held down there. A lot of the teams were afraid to go down there because we'd had some violent times in the 70s. And coaches like Larry Lugins, who was with the Custer Wildcats, he opened the door completely by saying, yes, we're going to be a part of this thing. We want to show that we can become a part of the LNI family. And he's done it ever since he brought his first team to the reservation. So
it almost seems then that LNI played a major role in improving race relations, community building, repairing some of those old, bad feelings from back then.
Well, the LNI, and then I think another factor was the Black Hills Powwow. And the Black Hills Powwow used to be in the summertime. And we editorialized that you got tourists all over the place here in the summertime. You don't have anything going in the fall or winter. And so we convinced their board to move it to October.
Yeah.
And we wanted to have it coincide with Native American Day. And to me, a lot of people don't understand yet how Native American Day or the Year of Reconciliation ever even got started, because you'll never see that there was a Native American involved in it. They always say George Mickelson. Well, George was very responsible for the whole thing simply because he had the power to do something
to declare
positive.
it, yeah.
but he had to have a shove, pushing the back for the Native American to say, look, the year 1990 is coming up. 1990 is the 100th anniversary of the massacre at Wounded Knee. The state of South Dakota should do something to reconcile the difference between the state and the tribe, because South Dakota was a state on December the 29th, 1890. And we convinced Governor Mickelson to first a year of reconciliation. And as part of that, to have a Native American Day to celebrate Native Americans. All of this happened in 1990, which is the 100th anniversary of Wounded Knee. And it's been growing, and we have a big parade here in Rapid City every year, thanks to Bruce Longfox.
Yeah.
And some of his cohorts. And it's become something we celebrate every year, South Dakotans, as Rapid Cityans. And I think that brings us closer together.
Yes. Tim, we're going to take a break, but when we get back, let's learn a little bit more after Lakota Times and now into Native Son News Today. So we'll be back after a word from our sponsors.
When discrimination happens in our community, and it does happen,
then it's time to stand up
and speak out to make it stop.
Discrimination hurts and excludes.
We can be better than that.
People of Black Hills have a connection to each other, and none of us deserve discrimination.
The Rapid City Human Relations Commission can help with discrimination issues in housing, employment, and public accommodations.
And each of us, when we see it or hear it,
can do our part to end discrimination.
You have a responsibility to stand up and speak out.
I have a dream. I want to be a soldier. I have a dream. I want to be a construction worker.
You can help kids' dreams come true by donating to Rural America Initiatives Building Fund.
Hi, welcome back to Oyate Today. Once again, our guest tonight is Tim Giago, owner of Native Son News Today and producer of Oyate Today. So once again, Tim, thanks so much for being here. It's been a great discussion, sir. In the 1990s, you had the Indian Country Today newspaper. You bought and sold it all within that decade. What was that experience like, sir?
Well, you know, first thing, Richie, is the newspaper gave the Lakota people, Indian people in general, a voice. We have people who want to write their opinions like any columnist would, like Ivan Starr comes out, and Elizabeth Cook Lynn, and great writers all, but they write from a different perspective than they're going to find in the white-owned newspapers. They write from a Native American perspective. Born, raised, educated in Indian country, they have a totally different view of what America is all about. And they write that way. And a lot of times, maybe the editors of other papers don't want to print their stuff because they don't understand their point of view. And so by having a newspaper that was Native American owned, it gave them an opportunity to express their points of view. And just like I and probably you learned a lot about what this community is about in Rapid City by reading their newspaper. And I wanted a lot of non-Indians to pick up our paper and read it because they would see different points of view. They would see different news stories that they weren't going to necessarily see or or hear in their own media source. And that was the most important factor to me, is opening minds by letting people read some of the intelligent writings of some of our Lakota writers. And we do have some brilliant people that write for us.
Definitely. What role does Indian media play in South Dakota? I know you explained a little bit there, but what role does Indian media play for South Dakota?
What the media, from our perspective, gave us is an opportunity to look at other sources of media, television, radio, and other newspapers. And so many of them make efforts to cover Indian country, but they oftentimes are erroneous in their reporting. And oftentimes they do more harm than good in some of the news stories, even though maybe they're trying to do a good news story. They don't understand what they're trying to write about. And I think our paper from the outset decided if we see these kinds of errors, these kinds of mistakes, or just plain stupidity in other media, we're going to let them know about it. So pretty soon everybody in the media know that Tim Giago in the paper, we're going to come after you if you screw it up.
Yeah.
And so it made them more alert and made them more responsible for covering Indian country that they weren't before. And it also prompted other newspapers, other media in South Dakota to say, there's a lot of news out there. I'm seeing it right here in this small Native American newspaper. Why aren't we covering that? It made them more responsible to get out there and actually start covering Indian country the way we were covering it. It opened up the doors, really, in the media.
You know who's been doing a wonderful job at that is South Dakota Public Broadcasting lately. They've been putting some great, wonderful stories out in our community.
South Dakota Public Broadcasting has always been good. You know, they've had people like Shirley Snavy as a correspondent for them, and Gemma Lockhart, both Native American women. And so you go back 30 years, they were out trying to cover Indian country. And they're doing a documentary right now that will be coming out shortly, I hope, on one of the great Lakota singers and songwriters, on Buddy Redbow.
Wow.
And I think that's going to be a really good story that we need to publicize.
That would be awesome. Tim, we're kind of running out of time here, but I just wanted to thank you for your work here. I know that this half hour went quickly, but I'd like to invite you back on the show and let's continue this discussion at some.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Richie.
Yeah, no, I learned a lot here, and you know, just sitting here I mean, it's like interviewing one of my heroes. So I appreciate your time, sir.
If I could just teach you to write a stronger lead sentence.
Hey, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I want to thank our producers. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Prairie Edge for hosting our show tonight, and I want to thank you for making Oyate Today a part of your night. You've been watching Oyate Today, brought to you by Security First Bank.
Yeah.